is Frances Willis, but I was born Frances Sell, and I was born on the 12th of May 1932. We lived in Chingford, right near the famous Larkswood swimming pool, which unfortunately doesn't exist anymore. I spent a lot of time up there, and on Christmas Day we used to go and break the ice. And then the people used to give us a nice hot cup of soup to warm us up again. That was just with my dad. My mother didn't swim at all. Very keen swimmer. He taught me at a very early age to swim. But what he had a problem with trying to make me dive, I preferred jumping in the water. No, he didn't like me jumping in because the correct way to enter the water is by diving, and I'm afraid he was a very meticulous man and expected to do things that were correct.
And he made animations?
Yes, he did.
In the back garden?
Yes, he got Barney from the Flintstones and had him looking at all the different plants by moving him one leg at a time until the model had gone right the way around the garden looking at all the different plants. He belonged to a photographic club and he got some big award for doing it. His name was Harold Sell. Well, he was somebody that sort of doesn't exist now. He was what was known as an engineer's pattern maker. But unfortunately, the computer systems seem to have taken over his job because they can be more precise. Well, a friend of his that was an apprentice with him, he started up the business and my father worked with him as a senior employee was the whole of his life. Well, my mum was a very pretty lady. She had lovely blonde curls, right up until a couple of years before she died at the age of 84. Her name was Doris Sell. Her maiden name was Bradstock. Well, no, because of course the war came along and everybody sort of had to work. I was evacuated away so that she was free to work, and then she worked as a dispenser in the doctor's surgery, Dr. Edith Summerskill, a well-known name. The surgery was in Edmonton. Unfortunately, yes, because I was an only child, they were determined I wasn't going to be spoilt. And so what children that have got brothers and sisters don't realise is that the parents' attention is divided among them all. But all of it was on me, so anything not quite right was immediately spotted. Yes, I did have a happy childhood, but unfortunately, once again, we come back to the Second World War, where I was sent away to 3 different places for safety. The first place I went to was Manningtree, which sounds absolutely crazy because it wasn't far enough away from London. And then I went to Queensbury in Yorkshire, and then I moved to Great Horton in Yorkshire. And after that I came home and stayed at home. The first place, no, it was horrible there. It was an older in my mind they were very old, but as an adult I look at it and I think no, they were only in about their 40s or 50s. But they'd never had children and they had no idea how to look after you. It was a bit frustrating for a 7-year-old. Rationing was on, and they seemed to my mind anyway, it seemed as though they were exerting the rationing on myself and the other evacuee so that they got more benefits. Oh yes, I had quite a good time there. I was with a relative anyway, and then when I couldn't go back to them after coming home for Christmas, I went and stayed with a friend I'd made at school. So that was very nice because there were two of us like sisters, which is something I'd never experienced before. Yes, they were very nice people, very nice people. Oh yes, I'd, somewhere along the line, I don't know how, I passed what was known as the 11 plus. So I went to a grammar school in Yorkshire. Yes, you do, obviously, because I became friends with the people that this girl was friendly with. That was quite nice. I know I was a bit of a daddy's girl, but I think I had a normal, happy childhood that 6 and unders would enjoy. Oh yes, I had one called Tiger. He was lovely. I really can't remember how old I got him, but I think I got him during the war. I'm still crazy about dogs. Yes, this is going to sound horrible. Oh yes, the rabbits I used to have, my aunt and uncle bred them for food during the war because rationing was very tight. And though I didn't realise it, what used to happen was they'd give me a baby rabbit to rear, and then they'd take it back and give me another baby rabbit to rear. But at that age, I don't think I realised that I was then having the one I'd reared for dinner. There's 130 Normanshire Drive in Chingford. It was at that time a standard terraced house with 3 bedrooms and a kitchen and the bathroom was obviously upstairs. Bathrooms were always upstairs, and there was a separate dining room and sitting room downstairs. It was a beautiful garden. My father was a very keen gardener, and we had a pond at one end of the garden which was divided off from the rest with a wall that the plants grew on top of, and a gate just so that as a young child I couldn't go wandering in there, but it was always full of water lilies and frogs and fish, and it was very beautiful. Oh yes, well, that is another horrific story. Unfortunately, it was after the war, and the girl I'd been evacuated to was down on holiday, and we'd both been doing nature study in classes, and my father had put some poison into the front pond to get rid of some of the bugs that were there, not realising it was full of frogs. So, being 2 horrible little girls, we then fished out the frogs and dissected them. It was very interesting that a nature lesson actually came to life outside in the garden. I think it was more that we were not exactly praised, but at least we were doing something educational. My mother was the 3rd child of 6. There were 4 boys and 2 girls, and they were a very close family even after we grew up, and they had children of their own while my grandmother was alive. we always got together for Christmas, and I can remember this huge table they had in the room, which literally took up the whole of the room, and so many people sitting round it. And she used to cook a huge goose for Christmas dinner. It was very nice. The eldest brother was called Stanley. He fought in the First World War. Then there was my aunt and my mother. My aunt was called Lily. Then there was Sam and Charles and Jack. Now Jack died at the age of virtually 101 just last year. So it's a long-living family. My grandmother was a very friendly lady. She was a very big, fat lady, let's put it in. And I used to hate it because she was all fat and flabby and she would insist in cuddling me up to her. It was horrible. My grandfather, I don't really know very much about him. To me, he was always a very old man that was sitting in a chair in the corner of the room. It was his second marriage to my grandmother, and he already had grown-up children when he married her. So he was quite elderly. I don't know anything about his first wife, no. No, nothing. I know that at one stage one of them was in touch with the other children, but basically they resented the fact that he'd married a much younger woman. My father's family, he's one of three. There were the two boys and one girl. My grandfather came from a family of what they call small people. He was the tallest of them, but he was very short. And my grandmother came from a family of very tall people, but she was a hunchback, so there wasn't much difference in size, but they were extremely Victorian people, very Victorian. My father's brother had 3 children and his sister had 1, but somehow after my father died, which he died young for people in the family, my mother lost contact with all his family, so I don't know what's happened to them since.
So when you came back to London, Chingford, after the war, were you still at school? Did you go back to school?
Yes, I was about 13 when I came back to live in England. It was still, the war was still on, but it was calming down as far as the Blitz had finished and all that sort of thing. But I went to South West Essex Technical College, which doesn't exist anymore. It's now the Lord Mackenzie Grammar School. That was in Walthamstow.
Was that quite a long journey for you to go from Chingford to Walthamstow?
It was a bus journey. But while we were there, the technical school was a great big building which is now a university, and we used to go to school in like old converted houses, and unfortunately one of the boys' one got bombed during the war, so it caused a great deal of confusion where you were travelling around to all different places to go to different lessons.
Okay.
It wasn't a settled school sort of thing. No, I don't make friends very easily. I'm a rather not a lonely person, a solitary person. We had friends in the road where you lived. What happened was, of course, it was safe. So all the children that lived on the road all used to go out in the road and play together, and they became your main friends. I left school at 17. Dear. You took a general education exam. They're not a bit like they are today, divided up. And I think we used to take the Cambridge Certificate of Further Education. It was something like that. There wasn't such a thing in those days. I don't think, when I say that there wasn't any sort of hobbies as such, I think mainly because there wasn't traffic on the roads, etc. And there was too much freedom, so much freedom to just move around and go places, that sort of thing. Well, I've always been into office work, not from my choice, from my mother's choice. I went to work at London Zoo in the offices there because my mother had a friend that worked there and she got me a job there. I was much more interested in going to where the animals were than getting on with the office work, I must admit. But then my mother's friend died, and without her protection I left. I didn't like the office work at all. I liked being with the animals. I wanted to work with animals, but I wasn't allowed to. In those days you did what your parents told you to do. They stopped me because in their mind the be all and end all of earning money was to do it in an office. When I went to the zoo, yes, I liked quite a lot of them, but I did have one favourite, which was a young orangutan. I can't remember his name, I think it was Chuck, something like that. His mother was called Molly, and she was an absolute pet, but I used to take Chuck for a walk by holding his hand, walking around the zoo, which had caused quite a lot of attention.
During your lunch break, or did you do that when you should have been working in the office?
I did that during my lunch break, which sort of sometimes got extended rather a lot. I went to work at, I can't remember which one it was. It was one of the big insurance companies up in London, near Holborn. I'm not certain, but I know it was a terrific journey. I used to have to go on a bus and on a tube, and I can't remember why I left. Most probably didn't like travelling, but and once again I was in an office and I didn't like office work. I went to work at a fairly local engineering firm, working as a statistician, and that was a lot better for me than normal office work. But I left that when I got married, so. I got married to David Bowman, father of my children. We got married in 1954. After 5 years of what in those days was called courting, but we were with a crowd of people, all from the old Scholars Association, so we'd all been to the same school, and we used to all go on holidays together and that, so we were a good 5 years of enjoying ourselves with freedom, because there was no marriages or anything. That was a great time. Yeah, we did what in those days was something very unusual. We used to go on the Norfolk Broads, and in those days you could go the whole day without seeing another boat, which anybody who's been to the Norfolk Broads recently will think is most weird. But George Formby was very often on the Broads, and you'd hear him coming along singing. There were 8, it was always a group of 8, but sometimes the makeup was slightly different. Somebody had, a couple would break up, and so somebody else would come in and that sort of thing, but nearly always it was people who had been to the same school. We got married at St Edmund's Church in Chingford. Yes, we went to the Lake District, a week, just a week. We rented a flat in Hertford. It was quite nice. It was in a very big house, and the flat was in what used to be the servants' quarters. Quite some time, about 5 years, I think.
Were you saving to buy your own home?
Yes, we were saving up. We bought our first house in Broxbourne. It was a semi-detached house, but it was a whole estate of new houses, a completely new estate. It was quite nice there. It was fairly open countryside, it wasn't too towny. And of course, once we got into that house, we started a family, so life changed completely. I had 2 children. The eldest one is called Kevin, and a year and 8 months later, I had Nicholas. Well, I would have liked a daughter, because it always strikes me, or struck me, that when you got older, you got closer to a daughter than you did to your sons. But since then, I've seen so many people whose daughters haven't got close to their mother as they've got older, that perhaps I'm just as well off with 2 sons. The boys were as different can be. Very dark hair and brown eyes, making him look dark altogether, dark skin. And the youngest one was as blonde as his brother was dark and small. As a child, he was very small. But like boys do, they grow. I had 2 very mischievous little boys, yes. But we coped. I tried to be strict with them, but it wasn't very easy because they gang up on me. In Broxbourne, the first year that the eldest boy went to school, it was the year of the very heavy snow, and there'd been us poor mothers trudging along, mainly with a small child in a pram, and the one that was going to school through deep snow right along a canal bank. In those days there was no shutting schools because it was snowy. You got there somehow or another. But it was very hard that winter. I don't think Kevin ever enjoyed school. Once again, you've got the difference because the younger one enjoyed school. I should think we were in Broxbourne for about 5 or 6 years. We then moved to Hatfield Heath, to a bigger house, which was quite nice there. It was a very friendly village, so it was nice. You could make lots of friends there. And they went to the village school. Oh yes, we had it built. We actually had it made slightly bigger than the plans were originally, because we wanted 4 bedrooms and a shower room up there, upstairs as well. Strangely enough, we had the bathroom downstairs, but had a separate shower room upstairs. I got very involved in the village because a lot of the time I was on my own with the 2 children because their father's job took him up north for a good part of the week, every week. He was dividing himself between 2 different factories. I was in the Women's Institute, I was the Arcala, and strangely enough I got myself involved in the committee for the church, but so there was quite a lot going on, and by that time I had 2 dogs and I joined the training club for the 2 dogs, so life was very busy.
So did you like Hatfield Heath? Did you like living in Hatfield
I
Heath?
liked Hatfield Heath, yes. It was a nice, as I say, it was a nice friendly village. We were happy there. We had guinea pigs and rabbits, and Nicholas had gerbils, and cats, numerous cats we had. I think I had 7 at one stage. We became known as the local zoo.
I was going to say, it sounds like you had your own zoo.
Yes.
So you were the origin of My Family and Other Animals, were you?
Well, in a way, yes.
So you joined the amateur dramatic group in
Yes.
Hatfield Heath, the Heath Players.
Well, I joined it. I joined it more because I was getting myself into everything that was going. And a woman I'd made friends with, also went, and so she took me along. But then my younger son came along to do some acting, and the older one was backstage on the stage work. He wasn't interested in acting, but he liked the idea of constructing stages and that sort of thing. All 3 of us were very involved in that.
So it was a great family hobby.
Yes. No, to be perfectly honest, after we left Hatfield Heath, I did belong to 2 other groups, and I'm afraid in my mind I can't sort out what production belonged to which group.
Were you ever the back end of a cow in a pantomime?
Evidently I was. I don't remember it, but I am reliably informed that I was. Yes, I worked in the village post office. That was quite interesting because you met quite a lot of people there. My parents moved to Eastbourne when they retired. Yes, they wanted a more leisurely sort of life than living in Chingford afforded. My father was 65, which means he would have been, it would have been 1968. They only had a short time there, but they already had friends that lived down there, so yes, they had a great time. They used to go old-time dancing. Well, that was another thing I used to do, but they used to go old-time dancing quite a lot. It was quite a long while after we'd, because of my husband's job taking him up north a lot, I think the marriage more or less just drifted apart rather than there was any specific reasons. It was very difficult because then money became, having had a husband that, shall I say, was reasonably generous with housekeeping and that, to being very tight for money. If I said what it was, it's difficult to align with the money values today, but the court awarded me £10 each a week for the two boys and £9 for myself, so that was £29 a week. But out of that I had to pay for half the mortgage as well. So yes, it was very hard. But of course I'd got my job in the post office anyway, so that helped. I met someone else. He was the brother of somebody I knew, I was friendly with, and he used to do a lot of car racing, and he was staying at his sister's because he was in the process of divorcing his wife, and he was staying at his sister's, and he got very badly burnt up in a car, and he was sleeping on a settee in his sister's, which with very bad leg burns wasn't an ideal situation. I had 4 bedrooms, so he moved in as a lodger in our house, where we were able to protect his legs and that. Things develop, don't they?
They do, they do.
His name is Raymond Willis, but he is known by everybody as Joe. I can't remember. Oh, he was in the building trade. Yes, when I first met him. Well, not terribly long, because my ex-husband and I were waiting for the property market to improve so that we got the best possible price for our house. So it wasn't all that long really, but most of the time it was when he was recuperating from these burns, which took 6 months or so to heal up. We moved to a little cottage, well, it was a semi-detached cottage in Steeple Bumpstead. It was a very nice place. That was my house. I bought it with the proceeds from the other one. So I only had a very small mortgage on that, but I had to get a better paid job. So, but we managed okay. It was once again back to office work, but this time it was in the accounts, so that's not so bad as general office work. It was a place called West Ropes in Sturmer.
And is that where Joe was working as well?
Yes, he was working there at the time, yes.
Okay.
He was a long-distance lorry driver by then. We stayed together, married for quite a long, well, for 14 and a half years. It was something that happened when my mother died, which made me realise that we ought to get married because of the complications that it caused, because my mother was living with a gentleman then, and things got very awkward. We were very happy together. It was just that neither of us, having both had a failed marriage, weren't particularly interested in getting married again. But it was when my mother was ill in hospital, the hospital wouldn't get the gentleman she lived with to sanction anything happening. They insisted on phoning me up, and I lived in Steeple Bumpstead, and she was down in Eastbourne, and it seemed such so impractical because I'd been away from home for so many years. Quite frankly, he knew more about her than I did. Nicholas was at school, but Kevin went in the army.
Okay. Well, tell me about Kevin and his experiences at school.
Summed up in one word, bad. He always seemed to be in trouble. He was a rebel through and through, and he always. It seemed as though he was rebelling against his father, although he didn't see much of him. He was fine with me, but any male authority was a no-go. The army wanted to take him in and train him to take a degree, but he didn't want to know about education. He was very good with his hands, and sort of could do anything that he turned his mind to. Nicholas was always studying, but I can remember well, while we were still at Hatfield Heath, he had an essay to write for the next day, and he'd been at it all the evening, and in the end I said, well, I'm going to bed, don't sit up long. He'd spent the whole night working at it, because if it wasn't right, he wasn't satisfied. But I might add that it was the last time ever he got away with doing it. When we lived in Hatfield Heath, I'd had a problem actually with Kevin at the village school, and so we decided to send them to a private school for a time. It didn't do Kevin any good because he took his rebellion with him, but Nicholas actually benefited because he went to Bancroft, but he also holds a record at the school, at the time, held the record at the school for the most credits in one year, plus the most debits in 1 year, because he was bored. Because his birthday's in June, the teacher said academically he was ready to go up to the next school, but age-wise he was too young, so he was basically repeating the last year at school, which of course was boring for an intelligent child, so he just played up.
So Joe liked car racing.
Yes, that was his main hobby. Unfortunately, it's an expensive hobby, and but we were having a great time doing it. I'm afraid neither of us thought towards the future. We were enjoying life as it was, because with the car racing, we didn't actually go on holiday to a holiday destination for years, because Joe always qualified for the national championships, and our holiday was spent going up there to partake in that. So of course it was, if you had a fortnight off, it was the week before the weekend preparing it, and the week repairing all the damage to the car after you came back. I was persuaded to have a little go at it, but I didn't really enjoy it. I'm not a very competitive person, and I didn't fight hard enough to win races. I enjoyed the idea of going around the track, but that's as far as it got.
So you stayed at Steeple Bumpstead for a number of years, and then you
7
moved to
years we stayed.
7 years, and then you moved to Stradishaw,
Yes.
a very different house.
But it was a nice house, and it was, at the time, mortgages, the interest rates on them were 15.5%. It was a struggle to pay for it, but our idea being that if we could manage to pay for the house, it would afford us a lump sum when we retired. We had actually managed to start thinking a little bit about being old then. But, it didn't come easy to either of us. We ran lorries, transporting whatever. We employed 2 people. We employed 2 people to drive 2 lorries because at the time Joe was at the holiday camps as an entertainment officer or whatever they're called. Yes, it was successful for a while, but it was successful, but by the time you paid everybody's wages and run the lorries and all the rest of it, there wasn't that much money in it. Joe decided it would be better to go and work for somebody. We were at Stradishaw for 23 years, which for us is a really long while. Normally we move every 7 years, but no, we stayed there for 23 years. I just don't know where the time went to it. Suddenly realised you've been there so long. There. I had 2 dogs. 2 dogs still. By then the dogs had changed as to which sort we got. In my lifetime we realised that I've now had 13 dogs, but they all live for good lives. Yes, it was nice there. It was very much away from everybody else. I'm always madly in love with the dog I've got at the moment. We moved to Cyprus, which was our retirement. Joe took early retirement. He'd had the person he was working for sold the business, and the people that he sold the business to, he didn't get on with, he had quite a nasty shoulder injury with them, and he'd got about 2 more years to go. So he wanted to leave this place. So we decided that he would take early retirement rather than find another job. Well, we have friends who moved there and they decided to start a bed and breakfast. And they said, would we like to go over there on a holiday? And Joe didn't know whether he would. He said he'd ask me. He asked me and I said I'd love to go. I then discovered that he was terrified of flying. But he decided that if he didn't look at any of these aeroplane crash films on the television, he would manage it. So we went over to Cyprus and I just fell in love with the place. Joe had been wanting to move out of England for quite a few years and I wouldn't go. And I don't know, it put some sort of spell over me, I think, because normally when I went on holiday, after about 3 days I wanted to get back to my animals, but I'm afraid I disgraced myself in the airport going home from that first holiday because I cried my eyes out because I didn't want to go home. So we talked it over and decided we would go back the next year for 3 weeks and experiment what it would be like living over there, going and visiting the shops and all the rest of it. And by the end of that 3 weeks, we were quite determined to go and live there. Yes, we took two Jack Russells with us, but we had to delay moving very slightly because we still had 3 very old dogs and they were too old to travel. So it sounds horrible, but it wasn't really meant like that, that we had to wait until they had died before we could actually move. It's in a village called Sadira, which you first of all think is a very small village, but like a lot of Cyprus, it's very spaced out because there's houses dotted around everywhere and not on estates. It was on an estate, but we looked at several houses, and when the estate agent opened the door to this one, you open the front door and you look at a most beautiful curved staircase, and made us fall in love with the house. It was more money than we'd intended to pay because it's a big 3-bedroom villa, but yes, that's how we chose the house, by the staircase. We were completely retired at the time. He now has a hobby where he fetches people from the airport, but they're all friends. We don't do it as an advertised business or anything, it's only people we know. And they started saying to us, well, can you, before you pick us up, arrange for us to have a car? So in the end we decided the easiest way was to buy some cars, and then we'd have the cars ready for them, because if you were hiring a car, we couldn't hire it for somebody else because you needed a signature. So but it isn't a business. It's quite an expensive, I mean, we don't lose money on it, but you have all the tax and insurance and everything to pay for. But it basically gives you something to do. I don't have anything to do with it now. I did at first because I still drove, so I used to do some of the driving, but about 3 years ago I gave up driving altogether. My reactions weren't quick enough. We have a lot of friends. Unfortunately, they keep on changing about because people go back to England for various reasons. So you then make new friends. But yes, we're never without friends, let's put it that way. The cul-de-sac where we live, nearly all the houses have changed hands, which at first it was, everybody in the cul-de-sac was very close and we all used to go together, but the people who replaced them, we have Cypriots with young children, so obviously don't fit in with us retired. We have living next door to us, we have a Cypriot with a Russian wife, a across the road we have Romanians, so we're very mixed community. We have a swimming pool in the garden. It has been because obviously being a hot country, you don't have your pool artificially heated. It has to get heated by the sun, which, believe it or not, we have a winter in Cyprus, so it gets cold. It's not until the ground all round the pool that the pool starts warming up. But it's always been my proud boast for the 11 years I've been there that I have had my first swim of the season on the 1st of May. I'm somehow doubting I might do it this year. Oh, it's the lifestyle in general, it's so laid back. I mean, you get something go wrong and you phone up the people to come and repair it, and they say, oh yes, we'll be along on Tuesday, but what they forget to tell you is which month they're going to come. And of course that most people there speak English anyway. It's only the very old people that do, but they're still very friendly. I was in hospital at one stage there and with Cypriot ladies, and we managed to communicate with each other some way or another by the names that were familiar to both of us, like she was telling me about down in Proterus. So she says Proterus, we both knew that, and then it was finding out how to speak it. But unfortunately I've not learned any Greek, or I say not learnt any. I can say hello and I can say thank you, but that's about as far as I can get. I don't think there's anything I don't like about Cyprus. As I say, it put a spell over me. I fell in love with it, and that's it, you know.